Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump recruitment discussion. And last week we talked about what you should be doing in Q3 and Q4 to start off 2026 with a full pipeline. This week we've said we were going to follow on that and make sure that we talk about a plan of action, implementing your Q4 recruitment levers and 2026 strategy. So this is our last session before we break for summer. So we're going to make this quite a lively session and quite an interesting session on things that we should be doing to help implement that plan. So we're going to crib on the back of last week and push on the back of last week. So first question is this. Last week we talked about Q4 mistakes. What's the most common reason agencies don't implement the plan they built in Q3, and how can they overcome that?
Mr. Pye, do you want to kick it off?
A lot of it is down to recruitment stuff. Just stuff happens, doesn't it? It doesn't matter what we say. It doesn't matter how much good planning we do. The world of recruitment is, someone you've placed on the Friday doesn't turn up on the Monday, and suddenly you've got to go and find somebody else. It's other stuff gets in the way, and in the planning that we do, we don't leave enough room for other things to happen that do need to be worked on more urgently. It's not an excuse, it's just what happens with the day-to-day running. Interesting, completely separate story, but my 18-year-old son started work in recruitment this week, and he just hadn't appreciated how much stuff there is to do in an 8 or 9 hour day, 9 hour day as he was told. So it's getting on top of the things that matter, prioritizing the things that matter, and as a leader, making sure that we've got that time to deal with the things that inadvertently come our way. It's probably the same in any other business. I've been wedded and enjoyed the recruitment business for 30, 40 years. But it's been able to have that availability in your day to deal with the important things as you grow the business.
I mean, I wouldn't disagree with what you've said, Dave. I think, stuff gets in the way. It's true. Plans in quarter 3 that don't happen in quarter 4 are, as you say, related to the fact that people get sidetracked, defocused, and it's, I think, utterly understandable. You've got to try and make a living. It's also related to the people around you. Are they on form? Are they focused? Have they left? What gaps are there? Are you having challenges with certain people? And so forth. It's very easy to be defocused. Making a plan, no matter what quarter, but if you're looking at sort of getting into the new year, having decided what the plan is requires a great deal of discipline. And I think it comes down to something that is psychological. We always find the time to do the things that we consider to be urgent and very important. I think that if you make the plans in quarter 3 that are going to reshape your business and set you up for the following year to have a more successful period, then you have to psychologically recognize it as arguably the most important thing you should focus on. If you don't have that mindset, if you fail to recognize that this is deeply, deeply important, then your plans will take second place. And you'll always be drawn towards the daily chores, the weekly things that need to be done. That, I think, is the biggest blocker to getting things done that are important. People, they will say they're really important, but psychologically, they don't really commit to it. They don't see it as that important. It can, I'll push it back a week, this plan, this idea, I'll push it back another week. You wouldn't do that if you'd won the lottery. You'd make sure you found your ticket. So the fact is, it's got to be regarded by whoever are putting the plans together and driving it as total commitment to it and finding the time every day, every week to getting things done. That shouldn't dominate every day or every week, the time that you need to do these things. There's still plenty of time to do other things. But it's making sure that hour or two a day or whatever it is, you get it done.
I say the same thing. It's all about commitment, because deep down they don't believe it's the right thing to do. And I think that's the bit. And I think the other thing that, Dave, that you're talking about is that their old habits drag them back. They expect a change is going to happen instantly. As soon as they implemented a plan, they expect the results are going to change. Well, it doesn't. you've got to work consistently and consistently hard and have that discipline on working those things to make sure the results that do change over a period of time. And how many clients have I'm working with where we've put a new strategy, and after sort of a week they're going back, it's not working. And then after 4 or 5 weeks, they're going, oh, it's now starting to work. It's now starting to work, because it takes a while for things to change. And I think it's old habits drag people backwards, working poor roles because they think they're desperate to fill roles, etc. And I don't think, as what Paul said, I don't think they've got the commitment deep down and really believe that what they have planned is actually going to be work or is worth executing. And I think that's the problem with a lot of people. So it's about what they're planning and how they put that plan into action.
Howard, I'd just add to the point and say that, most people, and that includes, I think, us as well, we become ingrained in certain behaviors, certain ways of doing things. If you've been in our industry for a while, for a period of years, decades, then you are pretty hardwired doing things in a certain way. And I think what we've been talking about over the last few weeks is changing. It's making changes, sometimes quite radical changes. And that requires a real focus and discipline to change. You have to change. To your point, people tend to fall back into bad habits, old habits, things that they have worked for them over the years, and that old cliche about Einstein's theory of insanity becomes apparent. So it is literally painful to make changes. It is painful. It hurts. Literally, physically, mentally, it hurts. And you've got to be prepared to go through those pain barriers in order to force change through it. If you can't, as a leader, come to terms with that, you're not going to get your people to either.
So if we change that then, so we all agreed last week that pipeline discipline in Q3 and Q4 is really key. And we talked about the cadence and the rhythm of meetings. So what cadence and meeting rhythm or dashboard would you sort of recommend to track, to create the habits and disciplines week in, week out, which we need to execute those plans?
Well, we have a saying, don't we, that we haven't used for a long time, that I used to use back in the days, which is slow down to speed up. And I think cadence is such a lovely word, because you've got to work out what is it that I need to measure. And then you basically worship the basics of that measurement. Whatever the measurements that you decide are important for your business, if you're doing contract or contract and perm and SOW and search and whatever the services are, there will be certain metrics, there will be certain basics that are really important, and they become the things that you worship, because they're the things that will get you to where you need to be. If they're right for your business, and each business they may be different, but if they're right for your business, they become the pulse. And that's the cadence bit of, actually, I know that if I do this, I'm going to get there. And it doesn't matter what else comes in to the side to try to knock you off your bike, to use the biking cadence analogy. You know what you've got to do. And they're the things that I think that everybody has to hold true to. And sometimes you need to slow down to start off to work out what they are. And one thing I would add to this is just don't have too many measurements. Don't have too many KPIs. Set the ones that are right for your business, are right for your service, the service that you're supplying to your clients, and then use those as the standard form of measurements that everybody can buy into and see.
I mean, I completely agree with you, Dave. I mean, a couple of things I would say. Because I mean, we can talk about old-fashioned KPIs, and you mentioned a cliche. Another one is you're only as good as the things you can monitor, and we work in a highly charged, highly changeable environment. Things move very rapidly, as we all know in our industry. It's one of the reasons we love what we do. The unpredictability of it all, it gives you that buzz, that challenge, that adrenaline pump. It also drives us all crazy. Nothing ever seems to go exactly as we'd like them to. And I think because of the volatility of the environment we work in, for me, these meetings need to be done on a daily basis. Now, I've always said this to clients, and you made a kind of alluded to a point there, Dave, about, it's almost like, and I'm going to be careful here, but it's like, if you look at religions, daily prayers, right? I'm going to be careful. I will be very careful.
Howard, where are we going?
But I mean, but if you look at anything around those sort of whatever religion, there are over 100 in the world, daily prayers. And so this is constantly doing things on a daily basis. It's kind of getting together, looking and saying the right things on a daily basis. And because, in my view, when you're looking at the cadence, the pulse, good word, I would be looking at doing most things daily, having morning meetings, lunchtime catch-ups, end of day mop-ups, and weekly discussions together with one-on-one reviews with each of the staff. And I would keep right on top of it. But there's another really important point here, and that is that, and you made this point, what are the metrics that you're going to follow? So what is it you stand for? If you're looking into the following year, it can't just be about the basic KPIs that we all know. It's kind of boring to mention it, the amount of vacancies we've taken, all the interviews we've arranged and so forth. What is it you stand for? How are you going to be different from your competitors? And I keep saying this, and I'll keep saying it forever. Why would a client or a candidate choose to use your business rather than one of your competitors? You have to figure out what is it you're going to do differently or better than your competitors. Why are you going to become a destination choice? And once you start to think that through, and that talks to your culture as well as a business, then you can start to figure out what the metrics should be. And it won't always be purely financial metrics. There'll be other metrics that will drive certain behaviors and values in your business. And you can't sit down and devise those metrics and talk about them on a daily, weekly basis unless you've done the homework beforehand. And now is a very good time to start thinking about why anyone, client or candidate, would want to use your services in 2026 rather than one of your competitors. If you can't answer that question, how on earth do you start to decide what those metrics and measurements should be?
So I looked at this question. I thought about the word rhythm, cadence, and things like that. And I thought about what I was doing in the past, certainly in my own business and with other business I've started. And I'd started off, as you suggest there, Paul, every morning, even as a solo business, a small business, team leader, directors. You just start off, and I asked the same three questions to my staff every morning. I said, what's the biggest difference? Also, what's the biggest thing you're going to achieve today? That can be a view of what they're viewing on. Where are you against your targets? And I wasn't setting targets as KPIs. I had objective key results. What was they trying to achieve? And then the third question I asked, what's stopping you that you can change? If you can't change it, then we shouldn't be doing it. In that meeting, though, I never got dug into weeds. I never got stuck into the weeds of what was going on. What I'd do is I'd write all of the things that were down, and then outside of prime selling time, I would then start to address those things with the right person. But then I started to make sure that people understood what prime selling time was. The requirement management, candidate acquisition, and business development, three separate things that should be happening each and every day, and they should happen for a bare minimum for an hour every day. And so by answering those three questions, people were striving to always to be ahead of their target because they knew where they were against their target each day. And by setting my objectives around what happens in prime selling time means that I was creating the habits that people would have to do, create the rhythm and forward momentum. And I use this analogy all the time. You might think you're going forward, but a lot of you in this room are like the momentum of water going down a plug hole. It seems like you're going really fast, but actually all you're doing is going round and round and round and down. And that's not what we want. So we need forward momentum and upward momentum constantly. So you have a lot of time during the day to address those type of things that is outside your prime selling time. So I'd never address anything instantly. I'd write it down, I'd understand it, and then I would look at what I required to create forward momentum. Last week we talked about driving habits without breaking delivery. And so if we look at sort of business owners with sort of 1 to 5 heads, how do you implement growth or growth driving habits without breaking delivery? And what's the best way to stay out of your own team hair while you're still?
You asked two bald men that question,
know,
so this is going to be an interesting way of answering it.
Well, there's a third bald man on that's got to answer it as well at some point. So, Paul,
none of the three of us are qualified to answer this question.
Follically challenged.
Follically in that way. I mean, I think the word habit, we spoke about that last year. If you have the processes right, you don't need to get in the way. Because if your team at the desk or your team leaders or however you run the business are being managed properly and appropriately, then as the overall leader, at the end of the day, you can meet with your manager or if you're managing the consultants themselves and just ask them to take you through what they've done. And you will have the assurance as a business owner that they are following the processes that we've agreed, that you've set with them. And I forget how you quoted many times how long it takes for a habit to become a habit. You got to work on it a long time. But it's exactly the same with recruitment. There are certain aspects, there are certain key performance indicators, there are certain processes that you've got to do to be able to be successful. And if you know they're doing that, you as a leader can tweak certain things if they're not doing it quite right. But the idea is not to get in the way. Recently, in the last 6 months, the people that I have seen who have left businesses, in other words, people that I've interviewed to hire for other businesses that I work alongside, most of the reason they're leaving is because they are being overmanaged. They just don't like that. And in a recruitment business where talent is really difficult to come by, the last thing you want to do is lose people because they feel they're being micromanaged or overmanaged. If they're following the process correctly, if they've got the right habits and you're comfortable with the habits that they're displaying, then you don't need to get in the way.
I mean, I think a couple of things I would say here. Number one, if you're a good manager, an excellent manager leader, it should be very rare for you to have to tell people to do things, because it's all about getting people to buy into why you do things. And that comes down to a couple of very important points. Number one, explaining the benefits of doing certain things in a disciplined fashion for the business and for the individuals concerned. That old cliche about the what's in it for me. So, making certain we work with people that think that way. It's been ever thus from 50 years I've been in the industry. So if you know that people think, why should I do that? How's it benefit me? Then you approach it from that perspective. How's it going to benefit them to do certain things, to embed certain processes, to make sure certain things get done? And if you fail to address that point, then of course people are going to cut corners. They're not going to do the things you need them or want them to do, and they'll find ways and means of getting around what you've asked them to do, which is going to undermine your authority and undermine the effectiveness of your business. The second thing is to coach people, to spend time coaching and training, because again, it's not good enough even when you get buy-in to expect that they know how to do certain things. You have to constantly train and coach. We're guilty of coaching and training only sporadically in our business, our industry. We coach new people, but the sort of loyal people that have been with us for a long time don't get the level of coaching and development and training that perhaps they should do. We kind of think they know what they're doing and we'll let them get on with it, when in fact we live in this ever-changing environment, and they probably need at least as much coaching and training as the newer people. So coaching and training and getting people to buy into why we do things, not least the mission and the values and the goals of the business, is where you begin with all of this. And I don't like the phrase micromanagement, because we kind of use that a lot. Now, for me, micromanagement, if we're going to use the phrase, which means you're constantly asking people what they're up to and where they're going on every hour on the hour, talking to people, relates to lack of trust. If you don't trust somebody, and I don't mean you think they're doing something illegal or that they're dishonest individuals, but if you don't trust someone, say they're brand new, then you need to be tight to them to make sure they're doing things correctly. That, I suppose, is some level of coaching and training. Where you have total faith and trust in an individual that works with you, then you can afford and correctly to leave them alone for a day, for a week, for a month, dependent on their level of seniority and your level of trust in them. So if you find you're in a position where you are micromanaging, it's probably because you lack trust in the people that are working with you, or at least some of them. And that's something you need to be cognizant of, because that's something you're going to have to deal with. And I think we're going to come back to that point in just a minute.
Sorry, just answering a phone. So I think the question is very simple from my point of view.
See, stuff gets in the way.
This stuff
He's,
is
he's not he's not paying attention, is he, Dave? He's on the phone
Yeah.
whilst we're
As this-
talking.
because I can multitask,
Yeah.
but just not very well. So I think, as a leader, and I think there's this, is that you should be leading by example. And what you're preaching, you should be doing, especially with this, the business is aimed at founders between 1 and 5 heads. So you're probably still on the tools. So that means you should be preaching by example, and you should be driving the things by example. And I think that means that, things such as business development, if you want a consistent pipeline, you've got to do business development every day. If you want a consistently good at filling jobs, you need to start rejecting the jobs that you can't fill. And you've got to live by that example, and you've got to preach that mentality. Otherwise, if you don't, then that is the excuse that everyone in your business will use that you're not doing it. And I think that's the bit when we start to think about what's happening and driving the right habits, that, without breaking delivery, you've got to start to think about what habits create delivery. And those are the things that you then champion. Those are the things that you preach. Those are the things that you lead by example. And once you start doing that and everyone starts to follow you doing that, that starts to create the culture of doing the right things, rather than the culture of, just had a conversation with a client this morning, which she was answering the question I asked her this morning. And it was about one of her consultants that's come from a very large recruitment agency, but always has a huge pipeline. And when we boil that pipeline down, you're only going to fill about 5% of the pipeline.
Yeah.
Because his mentality is that I have to hit the number of jobs on a KPI board, not the quality. And so he's going back and driving the quality and using that. And so that she's preaching that she doesn't have loads and loads of jobs on, but she has about a 75% fill rate, where he at the moment has less than a 10% fill rate. And it's the differentiation between that and there. So it's leading by example, create that how culture, how we're going to change that, how we're going to do that, and stop working roles that are never, ever, ever going to fill. But it's then, if you want consistent in growth of that pipeline, it's doing business development every day.
Yeah, great.
From there. So last week also we talked about having tough conversations to fix underperformance. Okay. So what practical frameworks or tools could owners of, let's say, 6 heads to whatever, should be using to hold people accountable every week without, using Paul's favorite word of the day, micromanagement?
And I think it's quite simple, this. And I'm amazed, actually, even in modern day recruitment, how many people don't do it, is visibility. Literally, either on TV screens or charts, or there is so much tech that's available today. I'm amazed that when I walk on sales floors, how many whiteboards are not updated, or even the more modern companies that are using the tech, how people can't see where they are. Yeah, either where they are on daily measurements, on weekly measurements, or monthly measurements. People have newsletters. People have, well done, this office has performed better than this office, or this person's performed better than this person. But if you walk onto a floor, for me, we are in a sales environment. I want to see how people are doing. And I think if you're not doing as well, and you've got that mentality that you want to do better, and you can see your name in lights, or maybe not in lights, it would encourage you to perform better. And I think that applies whether you're running a 2,000 person company or a 3-person company. So for me, a very simple tool is to have visibility of the performance metrics that we mentioned earlier, which are the important ones. Let's see how you're doing against your colleagues.
So I think we need to think about what is underperformance. So I mean, naturally, and Dave, you've raised it, underperformance is inextricably linked to financial performance. We will talk about underperformance regarding consultants as almost purely down to their figures, right? I think it's a broader subject. I don't just think it's about that point. I think you can have high performance from a financial perspective, but underperformance from the same individuals in relation to their attitude towards the business, towards their colleagues, teamwork, the senior leadership team. We've talked for many years about occasionally, unfortunately, having internal terrorists in the business. So I think when you talk underperformance, and I'm coming back to the point I made earlier, I don't think when you're looking at metrics, you should be purely looking at it from a financial perspective. You've got to look at behavioral metrics as well. So underperformance for me is a broader subject. So if you look at it from that perspective, if you consider that it is quite a broad statement, then you've got to look at things like weekly conversations, reviews, monthly reviews with people, one-on-ones I'm talking about. You're talking, and I come back to the cadence of the meetings every day, every morning, getting everybody together. We call them stand-ups. I'm sure everybody does the same thing. You know, what, as Howard said, what are your plans for the day? What did you achieve yesterday? And being in a position where you are speaking about your performance in front of your colleagues, your peer group, I think all those things count greatly. But I also think as leaders, there are things that have to be non-negotiable. If you have a view about the level of service that you wish to give clients and candidates in terms of care, consideration, behaviors, if you are looking at a level of performance that you expect from everybody relative to the actual physics of doing our job, how many CVs we send out, interviews we arrange, client meetings we arrange and attend, and so on, and you believe that those are the drivers to achieve sustainable and consistent success, then those are non-negotiable. And perhaps the only grey area would apply to people that are obviously just joining your business and learning the trade. And you obviously make allowances for new people. But you have to have those things as non-negotiable. And if people hit those levels, and again, there's an art to this. You don't want to stretch people so hard that they consistently fail. Equally, you don't want to lowball your targets so that they easily beat them. So finding the right levels for the individuals, because everybody's different, is important. But once you've agreed those things with those people, then you expect them to do everything they can to achieve them. And for me, those things are non-negotiable. And then we'll get to the discussion around why people are allowed to get away with underperformance in its broader sense, ongoing, and the damage that that can cause you as a leader, the colleagues that you have in the business, and the overall business, and the relationship with your clients and candidates have with the business, and why you need to tackle those things very early and not let them linger.
So I think I'm going to go back to question 2. And my answer in that was, in the morning, if you ask the same 3 questions, you know, what's the biggest thing you're going to achieve today? Where are you against your targets? And what's stopping you? You know, don't dig into the weeds, which means that as soon as you start digging the weeds, that meeting gets hijacked and you go down sort of little rabbit holes. But start to look at what they're saying is stopping them, what's creating that underperformance, and review that heavily. And then it's about implementing training that removes that blockage, whether that be a blockage of the CRM or whether it's training in a skills gap, etc. But very few recruitment agencies, in certainly small recruitment agencies, actually have training platforms, have training documents. You know, it's all led by, you know, whatever the manager thinks they should be training on. And I think, you know, if you look at us, we've got a training platform which for £150 a head, you get 40 videos, quizzes, embedded learning, you know, all sorts of slide decks that you can present to yourself, etc. But it's about training people so you can control what you can control and develop what you can control, and then you can hold the people accountable to them improving themselves. And I think that's the bit, that embedding uniformity, getting everybody doing the same thing and training them to develop to that, makes it very easy. Therefore, every day, if you're taking away their excuses for non-performance, then you start to create a marketplace where people start to perform. And so their prime selling time is where that change happens. So you should be required, everyone, to sort of pick up the marketplace and say, right, if I'm weak at converting, let's do a conversion course. If I'm weak at business sales, let's do a sales course. If I'm weak on this, do the things that stop the people making excuses.
Yep.
To give them a strength. If they then can't deliver, then that's a whole different conversation.
Yep.
But at the moment, I think because we don't give them the ability to perform, because we limit our training, we give them the excuses for poor performance. And so we take those excuses away, then things change very quickly. So moving on, We mentioned sort of planning for 2026 whilst building and billing, in Q4. What's the simplest way to test your 2026 strategy assumptions through live activity between now and December?
For me, and this is a relatively simple one that I'm not sure everybody would do, and that is to involve your customers.
Yeah.
You will have friendly customers that you can talk to about how you run the business in the way that they will talk to you about how they run the business. Not the type of customers that you have conversations about, have you got any vacancies? Yeah. I mean people who are friends of yours that are in the business. And I would test, you know, the final quarter assumptions. You know, I'm running my business based on these kind of metrics, and this is what we do. Does that align with how you're going to be buying? Because often in recruitment, we know what is the right thing to do, but if we haven't asked our customers whether that gives them the things that they value, then we may not be doing the right things. Because the more of what you do they value, the more success you're going to have. So that's with customers, and then you can talk to potential new customers about, well, these are what our customers appreciate about what we do. These are the metrics we use. These are the drivers we use. And I think that's such an important thing, to wherever you can get your customers involved, just have some thought leadership from them as well.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Dave. And if you look outside of our industry, you'll see organizations having forums, work groups with their customers to test new products, new ideas before they launch them, and make adjustments before they launch. And indeed, even after they've launched, consistently be going back and asking questions about whether it's still effective or desirable and so forth. We're very good at, I think in our industry, we're very agile. We're good at coming up with new ideas. We're creative, but we do that in the confines of our own four walls and don't often go out, as you've just said, and test our views and our thoughts on the very people that we're hoping are going to use those services, the clients and indeed our candidates, because we mustn't forget how important candidates are to the growth and development of a business. And it's, in my mind, it's become a lost art in our industry that we focus on filling jobs, but we don't focus on getting people jobs. And I think there is a different mentality around that. We're not going to get into it today, but it's the way I was taught, that you were taught, and I think it's a lost art in our industry. And, you know, at a point when people are not moving jobs much at the moment, there were some new stats out today about people sitting tight. When you get great candidates, you need to do something with them, not just wait and see if a job turns up. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. I think the fact is that you have to, not unusual, I think the fact is that you have to go out and test these ideas. I also think that, and to the point that's been made here, you know, you've got to keep moving the wheels. You've got to keep oiling the engine. We've got to keep making money whilst we are testing out new ideas. So, you know, it doesn't do any harm to have a sort of little pilot group, if you like, where for a few hours every week and several hours every week, you've got certain trusted people in your business, maybe including yourself, who are testing the new ideas, the new models, that it's distinct and it's ring fenced from your standard practices. And to the point we've been making, you're monitoring those things. Not only are you talking to clients and candidates, but you're monitoring the impact and the effect of these innovations. You're not throwing out everything you've always done to start something brand new. You're looking to see whether these new ideas are going to work. And if they begin to look good, and to the point that was made earlier, you give it a period of time to see the effect of the changes, then increasingly you can introduce them into the core of the business. But it makes sense to try and pirate these new ideas away from the core of the business, so you're not disturbing what consistently makes you money over here. So it takes, as we've said before, pirating time every week, every month, try new thoughts and ideas out, spending time with clients and candidates, and importantly, as we've been saying, making sure the people in the business are bought into these new ideas, that you've listened to them, you've taken on board their thoughts and ideas, you may have even adopted their thoughts and ideas, why not? And now the whole company is moving in the same and the right direction.
So I looked at this in a very simple way and I thought, if we're starting to look in what's actually happening in Q4, whilst we're still planning for 2026, start to look at my strategy and start to look at my execution. And I start to see what's working. Is my strategy working? I.e., are people executing it well, and are they getting the results? Or are people not executing it? How's it working? And then look to where the issues potentially lie. Is it my strategy that's not quite right, or is it the execution of that strategy? And then that boils that back down to the final part of that is the people. How do the people feel about the strategy? Do they understand the strategy, understand what's going on the strategy to enable them to execute it? We then go back to, are we training people to execute that strategy? And what Paul's saying there about, different models and different things, bringing different things, piloting those type of things and pushing those things across, then absolutely. But what we should be thinking about is, I think, we sometimes set strategies that are never actually going to be delivered. And then we expect the execution of that strategy to work, and it doesn't. And that drives poor performance and drives exhaustion of your people. So I think you've got to look at it at both sides of your strategy that you're trying to get into for 2026. Is it working in 2024, 2025, sorry, Q4? Is it the strategy that's working? Is it the execution that's working? Is it both working? If they are, great, because it should be producing the results. If one isn't, where is it? And address that is. Don't be the manager that thinks my strategy is perfect, they just can't execute it. Think about, is it too hard for them to execute, or have we trained them to execute it? And I think we've got to start to think, that execution gap is the biggest thing that people hit, okay, and then never ever be able to bridge again, because they don't understand that it's both sides that isn't working. It's not just one or the other, and drive it from there. So for agencies with 5 and plus heads, how do you implement urgency into Q4 without creating panic? So what structure, rituals, or decision filters do you recommend for owners, leadership teams, etc.?
Well, I think a lot of it is about using the data that you have as intelligently as possible. That old saying we've used many times, let the data decide, because the data informs the trajectory of where your business is going. And it then doesn't need to come across as in some way as urgent, because often urgency, as you say, the question can involve or can seem like panic. If you know you've got a destination to get to, and you know what it takes, what measurements it takes to get there, then there is no need for urgency. If you're a little bit behind, you can push a bit more. If you're ahead, you can keep pushing to see if you can get further ahead. And then it doesn't come across as urgency. It comes across as planned growth. It comes across as the leader, you're measuring what you need to get your business to where you want to get it to. The urgency tends to be when the leader or the manager panics because suddenly they realize we're coming to the end of the year and we're not where we need to be. Yeah, and then that does create an urgency because people aren't fools. They can see if you're nervous that you're not going to hit your numbers, or if your boss is on your back because you're not going to hit your numbers. Whereas if you know what the numbers are, it can be a much more measured approach to saying that this is what we've got to do. And you know what? We've tried this and we're 10% behind, so we've got to put in a little bit more effort. And then it doesn't come across as urgency. It comes across as planned progression. And I think that's what encourages people, A, to stay and also to perform better. If you know what their purpose is and you can align that with the metrics that you've got, then it becomes planned progression, which is the way that you get success.
I mean, I completely agree with you, Dave. Around this time of the year, sort of coming up August, September, if I think back to when I was running Office Angels, for example, I would certainly be starting to think and acting upon next year. And one of the things we would do is look at where we'd got to at the point of, say, the end of July, August, in terms of real actual figures relative to our budgets. And then I'd be talking with all of the individuals that are running offices and area regional directors and so forth, and asking for a projection from each of them relative to what they thought they would do between this point and the end of the year. And I would stress test those assumptions. Sometimes people would come in with ludicrously low numbers and I didn't believe them, didn't feel they were being honest. And sometimes they came in with hugely optimistic figures and I thought they were being ridiculous. So it was trying to come to a point where you were being realistic, even if it was a stretch. This is where I think we'll be by the end of the year. And I would do that across every element of the fee generation of areas of the business. Once I had that information, it made life a little bit easier to understand where we would be and also to give me an understanding of where we would be come January, for example. Now, the other things that come into those equations are seasonality. It never fails to amaze me when people say to me in January, oh, we had a really bad December, or the end of December was really slow. And I say, so it came as a surprise to you that December 25th was Christmas Day, that you didn't see that coming, right? I mean, we know that certain things happen every year. And to your point, if you were looking at a graph of 25, 24, 23, 22 and backwards, let's take out the whole sort of COVID scenario, but a standard year, you would see typically in most businesses fairly similar graphs. They're just kind of consistent. Generally speaking, they're consistent. It helps you to understand traditionally how your business is going to perform. And then you also have to put into that scenario holidays and so forth, because, we do give people time off. So once you've put all that together, an amalgam of all those thoughts, then as you've pointed out, Dave, the logic says, let's present that to our people and show them what is most likely going to happen. And the fact that we can't really easily make money as we ease into December and Christmas. And in fact, the first week of January is still pretty dead because people are still off. Let's have that conversation and talk about what activities do we need to put into this business so that we can all disappear off mid-December onwards and enjoy our seasonal break. What is it we're going to do? We're going to condense our activities not into 13 weeks, but into maybe 9 or 10 weeks. And I think those are logical conversations. They don't create panic. In fact, the opposite. I think it demonstrates that the leadership are in control of what's going on, in control of the destiny of the business, are planning appropriately, and asking of the people in the business the right things to do that are going to help them to make money personally and for the business to succeed and hit the new year in a good condition. So I think you're absolutely right. You use facts. You don't use emotion when you have these conversations.
So I think I'm going to agree with both of you there. I think urgency is created by not doing things consistently. And if you don't do things consistently, it creates panic. And that means if you've not done BD consistently, you don't have requirements on, it creates urgency. Your pipeline's low because you've not been filling jobs, etc. All of this creates panic and creates urgency, where if you actually have consistent growth, it doesn't. It creates a steady understanding of what you're saying, Paul, there. Therefore, planning that Q4, because we all know December's a flat month. But is it a flat month? It's only a flat month if you've had a poor September and a poor October, because it releases on. I had some of my best months in December's because I was always pushing for that extra deal, because the way the commission structure where I was at the time was, as soon as you hit your target, you then got paid 25% of everything. So the Q4 was when you'd hit your target, and I was planned to hit my target in Q4. And therefore I wanted to absolutely take as much out of the commission structure as I possibly could before January starts again. So I never had a slow December, because I was always trying to push. And it's if you think you're going to have a slow December, then you'll have a slow December. And that's when panic starts and urgency starts to creep in, because you've got to then do and build a pipeline for December and January. And that's what happens. That urgency then of doing those things comes. And when you start to create urgency, it creates panic. And therefore, your level of consistency and your level of capability drops because you're rushing. And therefore, you've got to do that. So create the right plan, create the right habits that will keep you on track. And as Dave will always say, use the data, because that will tell you what's happening. And the data will tell you how to address those type of things. And I think as soon as you start to address them early, so if I was addressing Q4, I'd be addressing it now, because 9 out of 10 times out of 10, if you address it really early, or you start address it really early. So last question. and we're sort of running out of time again as usual. We said there was hidden Q3 and Q4 opportunities that most agencies will miss. So what real world examples of an agency we've been working with or you've been working with, give me examples of what they've implemented to help them have a big Q4 and a massive advantage in January.
So one of the companies I work with, we looked at every single interview for a permanent candidate that they've had where our candidate hadn't got the job in the previous 6 or 7 months. So we went back, scraped all the data, had a look. Where are they now? Are they still in their probation period? We knew they were good enough to get an interview, but they weren't quite good enough to get the job. And amazingly, and this was last year, so I can only give you the data from last year, but amazingly, they placed 9 of those people that otherwise perhaps they wouldn't have even covered. And they placed 9 of them with 5 new customers because the candidate that didn't get the job had gone to somewhere else they weren't even aware that they were hiring. And it's not rocket science in any way, but it was really good intelligence of them to go and find out. And 9 fees for 9 permanent fees at 11K,
Nice.
as an average. They were able to kickstart the year really well.
That's a great.
It was over a couple of months. It wasn't just January, but still, it was good. It was good performance.
That's a great example. Mine would be very simple. I mean, it comes back to the point I was making about the projections, understanding where reasonably we think we're going to finish the year, and not accepting that. So things that we've done in the past is to put an incentive program in for the colleagues, for your colleagues, to say, okay, this is where we think and you think you're going to be by December 31st. If you could achieve 10-20% growth over that number, we would be prepared to give you X% of that by way of an additional bonus. It will give you a very happy Christmas. It's a win-win because the business ultimately, if they really push on, make more money, you can afford then from the gap between what you knew you were going to get to where you actually got to pay a slice of that money to the person and also retain quite a lump of it from a profit perspective. It's an absolute win-win. If you're going to do those projections, don't accept them. Say to yourself, let's push people nicely, but let's give them a real shove. But at the same time, make it worth it from their perspective to really give it some before the end of the year, which of course is going to help you as you launch into 26.
So I look at what I said before. I look at my strategy. Is it getting results? How do I either supercharge it or bring it back online? I look at the execution. Do my team's output sit in line with the results that I'm expecting? And have my team got the skills to deliver that? So I've been working with a client who their business has been fairly yo-yo over the last 2 or 3 years. And so we started to look at all the jobs that we didn't fill, Dave. So all the jobs that we didn't fill, we then went back into those clients. From one of those clients, this client picked up 70 brand new roles.
Yeah.
From those 70 brand new roles, we did exactly what you were talking about. We looked at every candidate that we put forward for those roles that didn't get the job. Where have they gone to? Where are they going? Where have they come from? Created that secondary business line. So we actually did a proper view of lead generation to look at the new revenue stream. And what we found was that absolutely closed the execution gap that we had and actually increased it and accelerated away. So we actually started the year on a positive rather than a negative because we actually smashed 2024, and we came into 2025 in a really, really positive marketplace. And I think a lot of people think that there's this silver bullet in recruitment that's just going to appear, where I don't think there's many silver bullets in recruitment actually left. It's just simple viewpoint. There is a requirement. We went back into all the requirements that we hadn't placed. We found one client that actually had a big opportunity, took that opportunity, and then looked at the leakage down the line of opportunities that we've been missing. And it's that opportunity, let's call it seep, that happens because what we're seeing is those jobs disappear even though we're not getting anywhere near those jobs because we're not lead generating, we're not then following the clients up, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those things, it's about the consistency of doing those things day in, day out gives you opportunities that you didn't think were there. And most of those opportunities will be sprung from something within your own pipeline. Ladies and gents, that's it for this week. Paul and Dave, thank you very much for your input. As I said at the beginning, we are closing down for our summer holidays. We will be back in September. So I hope you all enjoy your summer break as well. Dave and Paul, thanks very much for your time.
Thank
and
you.
We'll see you all in
Thanks,
September.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great August. See you soon.
Have a good few months. See you soon.